next Monday. Yes, we are recording this. And I think we'll be recording all of it. Don't be shy when it comes to questions, and just go ahead and write. Stupid questions are very welcome. I will probably ask some of them, and participate. We haven't told you yet, but or actually, we haven't asked the speakers yet, but we will most likely share stuff, materials, presentations, background notes, etc., in the Games for Culture community on My Creative Networks. Berit is going to share the link for that. It's free. You can just go in there, and then you can find, most likely that's where you're going to find the recording, where you're going to find the PowerPoints and whatnot. So go there after this session, or if you're bored during this, but I don't think so, to check out My Creative Networks. Good. It is now 5 past. I should just be ad-libbing a bit here the first 5 minutes while people are getting in. People are still getting in. We have Oscar coming in. So let's not wait any further. We have 4 speakers, and then at the end we have a Q&A. If you have questions, come during one of the speakers and you don't want to forget them, write them in the chat and we'll get back to them, okay? So that's that we do. And I actually also agreed with all of the speakers that if there are things that are not completely clear or needs a bit of clarification, I may interrupt them, but that is going to be the exception rather than the rule. So let's start now with Mary Flanagan, the founder and CEO of Resonym, an independent, women-led developer and publisher of original board games, card games, tales, and ephemera. Her works extends into games, interaction, product design, architecture, computational poetics, and the environment, focusing on themes such as play, culture, and the interplay between human behavior and digital environments. And I don't know why we only given you 20 minutes, because this is really interesting stuff. But Mary, take it away. The Zoom is all yours.
Wonderful. Does everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
Oh, hurrah. Oh, hurrah. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be with you this morning on my time this morning. It was supposed to be afternoon, but it's a long story. Anyway, wonderful to be able to share some of my thinking about games and the way that they interact with culture and in particular human values. So one of the things that I kind of am known for in my academic work is thinking about values at play, values in the design of games, also in the design of board games. So I've actually looked at digital games and analog games in my work. So in 2014, Helen Niesenbaum and I wrote a book called Values at Play, where we investigated how designers were figuring out how to uncover values in existing games and actually how to embed them within games that they're creating themselves. So this is something I've been invested in for a long time. We've developed something I'm not going to talk about, but I think there's a similar method being used in your network. I have this Grow a Game cards, where we look at values and add mechanics and things like that. So as a brainstorming tool. So that was developed way back in 2007 in my research lab, initial version of the Grow Game cards. And that is a method. But I want to just take a bigger picture look at the shaping of human values and how we think about human values in the design of stuff. We are really focused on games, but the values and design community for decades has focused on technological change and the shaping of human values. And let's look way back at the invention of the telephone. Okay, so we're not talking about games, we're talking about just inventions. So the telephone, in the United States, it was a marvel when these devices started coming out in 1870s, 1880s. There was a long distance network in Europe and the US. This became available by the 1920s. And the telephone was this hyper advance in communication. And it also was seen with some skepticism. It was seen as an invasion of the home, of the middle class home. It was seen as something that disrupted social order. because women could actually talk to people they wanted to talk to without supervision. So these are unexpected consequences that happen as a result of a technology. And it was actually the telephone was seen as the great corrupter of women and the ruination of the family. So that is a very interesting way to think about a technological change bringing about shifts in values. So when we think about the telephone, it brought connection, immediacy, freedom, these kinds of big picture things, privacy. We could talk to someone that you wanted to talk to, but it actually was at the expense of the sanctity of the home, control, freedom for men, et cetera, et cetera. So there's always, every time we have a cultural object, a technology in particular, but it can actually be not just technologies, but technologies in particular have these like loaded values that they kind of express and they kind of package along with the invention. So when we think about games, they're much more complicated than telephones, right? So unpacking values in them is a really big task, and embedding values in them is a really big task. Bruno Latour is one of the figures in the science and technology studies who's really, really influential and important. And he has talked about how technology is kind of society made durable. And I would also argue that technology kind of creates society made durable. And we see this all the time now with the way we all interact with our phones as a very, very big disruptor in kind of social norms and social orders of, like, for example, 50 years ago. So thinking through those ideas, I wanted to think about introduce this idea of games and values. So what do we mean by game values? You know, if you're a developer in the industry, you would say, well, game values, you got to know your audience, you commit to quality, keep it simple, respect the player, fun first. There's all these values that game developers talk about when you're actually thinking about creation of a commercial game. But I'm talking about bigger picture human values like justice, equality, love, and these things that society or societies deem important or desirable, good, significant, worthwhile, meaningful, and essential to communities. And these values are not universal, and investigating values is a tricky subject because one cannot claim that there are universal values across all societies. We all know that the world is a complex place with lots of different communities and voices in it. But how can we think about some of the shared global values, and especially in your context, the European values? How do we define them and bring them forward in our design process? That is something that I think you all are invested in pretty deeply in this endeavor. So I want to just use Marcel Duchamp playing chess as a moment for thinking about values just in something very simple like a chess. Okay, so it's kind of easy to see values embedded into chess. You know, there are suppositions, there are metaphors in chess. First, it's a balanced system of equal power. So there's this idea of equity in there. It's a binary battle. So one side wins, winner take all. There's a rare example, unless a stalemate or a draw, but most of the time you end up with a winner take all scenario. Another value is that some pieces are worth more than other pieces. So for example, we have pawns, and those are more expendable than, for example, the queen. So we value the figures for their powers and for their uniqueness in the game. And so even something as analog and abstract as chess, there are these values embedded in there that are not givens in the world necessarily, but they're created or embedded in the act of creating the game. So, and if you look across cultures, games have embedded values for quite a long period of time, and games express their cultural contexts. And I want to just use two very older examples to get us then thinking about digital games. The first is the Gaian Shaopur. There's a lot of different names for this game, but it may look familiar to you. It's a game from the Indian subcontinent that was created as a religious game to practice thinking about Jain, Hinduism, and Muslim religions. It was used across different religions to kind of instill what is good and what is not good, and to lead people on a path of mostly kids actually, on a path of higher power or higher being. And it was intended to teach spiritual liberation. Now, of course, after the British colonization of the Indian subcontinent, you have a commercial game developed out of that called Snakes and Ladders. But in fact, it was a really important historical and cultural game. And on the right, this is a game from Japan, and there's a whole series of pictorial games called Sugoroku that reflected all kinds of things, cultural memes. There are games about 100 poets. There's games about haikus and all these different cool stuff. But I like to show this game because it's kind of a race game where you go around the pieces, the squares. But it reflects its time period. If you see if you see like traditional Japanese dress with Western kind of clothing mixed. Women tended to be in traditional dress, but men were adopting some of the outfits from the West, etc. So you can see this moment when Western ideas were coming into Japan, and how it was working out in the context of everyday life with this game. So when we start to pick apart games, we can really find these values. And then the question for us is how to continue to make sure that those values that we intend to be inside a game stay inside the game. So I want to talk, I have three contemporary digital game examples that I wanted to just mention. Some of these may be familiar to you, some of them may not. So if you don't know these games, I would recommend playing them. One is called Gone Home from 2013, and the Fulbright company created it. And it's this interactive story set in the 1990s in the United States. And the game uses this kind of horror aesthetic, but pokes fun at the horror aesthetic as well. It's actually a game about learning about a family and about people and their stories and histories. And it's not a slasher game at all. But it uses a lot of these tropes to continue to keep you interested in the exploration of a house. And you play as this person, Caitlin Greenbrier, as she returns home from a college trip and finds no one left in her house, her family home. And one investigates and finding clues related to her family, her sister, et cetera, et cetera. So I like to use this game as an example because it does express kinds of values and intimacy, honesty, accountability, courage. You start to feel compassion as the characters reveal their relationships to one another. You see that there's this love story, and it's also about family love, etc. So different kinds of values start to emerge from the game as you play it, and that's also true of the game Dream Daddy, which is an interactive dating simulator. And in this game, there's this very strong presence of the daughter. You play as a single dad, and you are meeting other dads in the environment, and you are trying to kind of figure out which kind of relationship you might like to have. But the daughter has this very large presence in the game as well, and she's very funny and sassy. So these different values come across, and here tradition, for example, comes out in the way that the family has certain kinds of habits and stuff like that. So there's a investment in the way the family evolves and shows their relationships. It unfolds through time. And the final example I wanted to discuss really briefly is this game called Unpacking, where you basically end up as a nameless person, like a third person point of view, and you have to unpack boxes. And it's actually a story told through a series of moving house. So you end up in this new place, you have to unpack your stuff, and by doing that, you understand who you are. as a character in this world, and who your relationships are with, and this kind of thing. So in unpacking your things throughout the course of a life, there's a narrative that emerges through the mechanics of unpacking and the objects that are appears. So there's never characters, there's no dialogue, but it's really an interesting way that one's actions reveal the character through moving house through 8 different levels. So you cannot place the items in all the spots, right? So some items are kind of there's a puzzly aspect to the game where you can't always you can't just make a jumble of stuff, and this idea of stuff is laden with story and a sense of gratitude in a complex way for something that seems like a simple idea. Unpacking things. Why would that be fun? Well, it's fun because there is a sense of story, narrative, and investment as you go through that game. So these examples are, more kind of less obvious ways we can explore values in games by looking at games that try new things. I think I picked these examples because they're not just your typical shooter game. They're not playing on really old tropes of what games, when we think of commercial games, these are not Call of Duty AAA big shooters. They're something else entirely. And so I would argue that the invention or the thinking about values can often require that we, as designers and makers and people teaching, for example, in game jams, that we investigate new mechanics that allow new values to emerge. But I'll go to one more traditional kind of big picture game, which is Civilization. Oh, my little Civilization is kind of cut off in the bottom. And I want to just mention this because Civilization, big game, lots of things going on, and a big favorite trope of digital game designers, especially in large-scale games, are a very big device is the idea of the moral dilemma. So that is often a place where values are more obviously kind of at the table, where you're thinking about different kinds of things. And I wanted to just give this example. It's often about killing. Do you kill this or do you kill this? Or not kill this? That tends to be that kind of the seat of moral dilemma. And you'll see some game scholars and ethicists writing about these moral dilemmas. Steve D, who's a developer of TinStar Games, he gave it this great example of with playing Civilization Beyond Earth, and he encountered the story path with a branching choice. And one is to send escaping refugees back to their captors who claimed they were criminals, and the other was not to send them back. And D he was writing about these moral dilemmas, and he said, both options had mechanical value, and the returning option was by far the best one for my game at that point. But with Australian refugee politics as it was, there was no way on earth I felt able to send those people back. Those fictional people without faces or even symbols in my game, people who are just a sentence. So that's from a blog that he put out. But these are ways that a lot of contemporary designers think about, these moral questions or moral dilemmas, and allowing players to come to their own conclusions about how to settle those kinds of things. So when Helen and I wrote the book Values at Play, we looked specifically at how to tease out values and keep them in the design process. And we came up with this kind of chart of where values can actually happen. So where do values emerge? So yes, they can emerge in the aesthetics of the game. They can emerge with characters or narrative. I mean, those are more obvious things, but interface. What if your interface is blinking your eyes instead of running around? What if your body is engaged with gameplay? So all of these kinds of multiple prisms are places where values can emerge and affect how games are understood and how games are really expressed in the game environment itself. And I wanted to just say, okay, well, now let's say we are thinking about our values. We understand kind of where they're coming from or where we want them to come. How do we know that the values are in the game in the end? Because we may start off with lofty ideas, but how do we really know? So there's a lot of ways that one can assess games. From the commercial industry, we have tons and tons of play tests and level mapping and all of this kind of analytics. I like to use social psychology methods and run actual big controlled studies of how a game can actually impact players. And I find this method very interesting because working with social psychologists has given me as a designer a whole different set of vocabularies and questions and understandings about how people can relate to their game. And as a designer, I might be observing one kind of activity or reaction, but really when it comes down to a study, different things can emerge that are kind of surprising. So for example, attitude change, belief change, behavior change. And social psychologists for 30 years, at least 40 maybe, have developed really good measures for some of these difficult topics, like how do you measure empathy? How do you measure, players' interest and ability to help each other? How do you measure racism? And if your levels of tolerance have changed, or your attitudes and your beliefs. The hardest thing, of course, is to measure behavior change, but that is one of these holy grails of research in the end. And you can design studies that actually with games that affect behavior change. And if you're interested in that, I have tons of papers and things at my research lab, Tilt Factor, tiltfactor.org, where we have done these kinds of studies for 20 years in a social psychology lens to be able to really unpack what the games are doing. And I just want to end on a word of caution, and because it's one thing to design with lofty ideas in mind, but to actually show that they made it through the design process and they made it out into the world and players found them. That is a hard challenge. And some of us have been working a long time on that process and trying to make it so that it actually can be tracked, that you can find the values that you thought were in the game, and do they make it to the end of the process after all the input and all the ideas. So that's where I wanted to end with you. These value systems are prescriptive and prescriptive beliefs. They affect ethical behavior of a person. They're based on intentional activities. And designing and defining shared values and seeing them flourish in our games is the goal, I think, with this collective endeavor. So I just want to thank Epic We for this amazing network of people trying to promote and commit to values, and I'm thrilled to help the conversation thrive. So thanks for the invitation to come, and I look forward to questions and interrogations.
Thank you, Mary. Fantastic presentation. You'll be around for the Q&A here at the end. It was really, really interesting, and I'm definitely going to look up this Indian game and see, seems like you were presenting it as how both Hindus and Muslims children could learn about both religions. And anyway, let's not take questions now, but move straight forward to Gaetano Dimita. He is the reader in interactive entertainment and intellectual property law at the Center for Commercial Law Studies at the University of London, where you focus your research and teaching on games and interactive entertainment law. You are also the founder and editor-in-chief of the Interactive Entertainment Law Review, the producer of the More Than Just a Game conference series, and the co-author of Mastering the Game. And you are also happily also a video games enthusiast. Happy to hear that. So, Gaetano, now the Zoom is yours, and I know you don't have a PowerPoint, so you're going to be, capturing us with your words and your looks.
I hope so, but it's really difficult to go after Mary. I mean, next time I will have to negotiate and go first to avoid any comparison. No, thank you very much, Mary. It was an amazing presentation, and what I want to share with you actually follows your train of thought. But I'm afraid I'm a lawyer, so of course I'm looking at it from a different perspective, and I'm really curious. But of course, thank you, EPIC-WE, for organizing this. It's an amazing opportunity, and I'm already enjoying it a lot. So what I would like to share is a thought, because we know a lot about the power of video games, their immersiveness, this global scale, and we also know a lot of the power that they have in promoting, the bad aspect of society, being, a resonance a chamber for everything that goes bad online. I mean, we have seen pre-pandemic in particular, a lot of discussion on all the bad things happening in video games. But we also noticed during the pandemic how video game can be, a force of good, could be a good place where to meet friends, meet your family, and produce something positive. And we had a moment at the end of the pandemic that probably, as video game industry and researcher, we were uncomfortable with the fact that we were the good guys for once. It was not about the video game addiction and disorder anymore. It was not about harassment. It was game being there for good. And this sparked a little bit of more serious legal analysis on what can we do with games. Because we do know they're immersive, we know they're global, we know that they are complex subject matter of protection for intellectual property law, so multiple form of IP, they are embedded in a complex matrix of contracts, and when you produce them and distribute them globally, they kind of follow global regulation. That means regulation for every single countries in which are actually distributed the game. And something that has been pointed out a long time ago, actually by the CEO of Improbable, a video game company, like video games are really unique because if you think about it, nowadays, for most of the younger generation, the first people they meet outside of family and school are people they meet through video games. But from a legal perspective, the first contract design is an end user license agreement with a video games. The first money they spend is money they spend on a video game or on microtransaction in a video game. And for most of them, the first money they earn is through a video games because they are streaming on Twitch, they are putting their videos on YouTube, they have their short video on TikTok, or to show you how old I am, whatever is the new social media that kids use nowadays. But there is a very strong form of interaction beyond the interactivity of the video games, also with the way we understand rules and norm. So I'll try to make it as linear as possible, but it's not fully entirely developed in my head already. That's why I don't have a presentation. Basically, the way we design video games is dictated by our local reality. So developers in country X will have to follow rules, laws, and regulation, and also consequently ethical and cultural value of the country in which they are designing the video game. And this is okay, this is normal, this is human. Actually, the video game industry is being very proactive into moving into what is being called culturalization of a video game. Being, of course, I'm not talking about the 90s and early 2000s, but more recently, much more attention in this cultural aspect on non-offending. But we don't have to forget that creating a video games and a set of rooms in a video games from a given jurisdiction actually has the power to transfer it and to make it global and international. Because video games have an insane transnational power. Communities in video games, they are transnational, but they will absorb the ground rules set up from the developer and the publisher in any given jurisdiction. So we end up with an interesting circle that is not being fully explored. It's being fully explored more by behavioral science than by the law. What I mean, If you design a video game starting from country X, then you publish the video games, people playing your video games online will be absorbing the set of rules, the method of governance that you design in your end-user license agreement. That, of course, is going to be localized because it has to be localized. But the ideas behind, the big values behind the video games will come from a determined geographical region, if not a countries. This set of governing rules will impact on the internal rule of the video games. That set of community norms, custom internal rules of that community, but most importantly, on the understanding of the rules, the right and wrong within the video games. And the bit that we don't fully understand yet is how this understanding of the rules within the game actually impact on the understanding of the rules outside of the game. I'm not making the old distinction, online, offline, away from keyboard or a keyboard. We are the same people. We are citizens of a specific countries, and then online, we're citizens of the universe in which we're playing and in which we're interacting. Now, if you think about it, and I don't want to get into the dark side of social engineering, but if we could find a way of understanding how positive rule, positive value gets implemented and transferred online, we could actually, and I throw it as a joke, we could actually make society better, a video game at the time, the moment you understand this passage in the translation of rules between one jurisdiction to online back to the jurisdiction of the player. This concept of player as being citizen of the video game. And that will also make understand how we can create a set of rules and norms that are actually human-centric and can be fully understood beyond the cultural value. Of course, there is a dark side in understanding this mechanism because video games are also very interesting from a lawyer point of view because they are the perfect ecosystem in which public and private are together. And outside of video games, we already experience a lot of the dark side of public entity outsourcing, governmental power to private entity. And of course, I'm talking about social media. I'm not trying to hide with my words what I mean. But video games are in an advantaged position because why in social media engagement is created by conflict. You react to things that really annoys you or things that you're really passionate about, pro or against. In video games, from a commercial aspect, you create engagement by people enjoying spending time in the video game. So there is also, an economic justification of making video games environment better. You can argue that probably some video game companies are more successful than others in creating their community, naming their community as healthy and as positive, but it's something very interesting to study. Finally, and this is the last part of the reflection, he also imagined, and it's technically possible, for everyone on the planet to be in the same place, playing the same video game online. We have firstly to determine what are the values, rules, norms that we should apply. But for me, it's also very interesting to try to understand and anticipate who gets to decide. Who gets to decide what are the values, rules, and norms that we want to export, or they, I don't know who we and they are in this scenario, but who gets to decide at the end of the day what is the thing that we need to export and make transnational, and what are the things that instead we should find. That is fantastic to study because we're talking about video games. So there is also the assumption that there are control closed environment, and to some extent there is a magic circle. I'm with Mia Consalvo. I mean, there is no magic circle, but there is this idea that is within a video game, it doesn't really matter, the damage is limited. But it's very interesting to have the reflection before the problematics become problematics for society as a whole. Basically, with video games, we can solve a lot of problems that we didn't manage to solve when the internet became part of our entire life, because now we do have understanding of the problematic and the multiplication, the crux of the problems when we analyze it into video games. And that could really help in finding a solution for better regulation and better sharing of community norms. I think that was 9 minutes. So I'm 1 minute.
Fantastic. Fantastic, Gaetano. That was super, super interesting. And for all of you participating, please write your questions in the chat. I have several if you don't have here for the end. But both of you were talking about, actually, Mary started out with talking about European values, and you said that we could solve a lot of problems using games. And so, but really, really interesting stuff. But we have to move on, and we're moving on to Susanna Montgomery. Susanna is an event manager and strategic communicator by trade. You started your professional life working in the arts and cultural sector, from opera to museums, and you developed a passion for creating engaging and meaningful audience experiences. That's certainly what we need. You moved to the Netherlands, where you focus on co-creating strategic international partnerships, programs, and immersive experiences between higher education and cultural sector on topics like creative placemaking, data-driven storytelling, and digital rights. You have joined Epic Recess recently, but I think you've been with us all the time, it seems like. You're with Sound and Vision in the Netherlands, some great people at Sound and Vision. We're also working with them on other projects.
I think we perhaps lost Rasmus. We'll give him just a second. I'll, what's it called, like a duck, tread waters, at least in Danish, until we get there. But otherwise, Susanna, I think he was almost finished introducing you. So I think you should just take the floor, and then you can be Rasmus or just be Susanna, any way you like it.
Sounds good. I'm so glad I had that heart palpitation moment if I thought, oh no, am I the frozen one? But thankfully not. So I think you can all hear me.
Yes,
I'm going to share. Okay. Can you see me?
Perfect, Susanna.
Amazing. All right. Well, then, we're about halfway through. I also worked for a long time as a facilitator and lecturer. I love a good icebreaker. So I'd love in the chat, or maybe to pick on, for example, our speakers, I'd be curious, or even Rika yourself. I want to get us into really thinking about the importance of games in our everyday lives. So just to take a couple minutes, I'd love to hear about your own epic gaming experience. I use the same icebreaker when I kick off our game jams over in the Netherlands. So having people think about maybe amazing game night you've hosted, the proudest you've ever felt after winning a game, maybe your favorite game as a child, or perhaps a little story about designing your own game before, whether you've been someone who's done a game jam in your life, maybe you design one for class, maybe you make games for your job. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm curious. Maybe like short answers, fun answers. Mary, do you have a story of an epic game experience in your life?
I mean, there's just a lot.
You can give me one. It doesn't have to be the best one. Do you have a favorite game as a kid?
Yeah, I was kind of addicted to Indiana Jones, the Raiders of the Lost Ark Atari game, which I played, a lot. And I also I loved this game called Dark Tower, and it was actually had a little bit of an electronic tower, and the battles would show up in the little tower. So anyway, I played a lot I played a lot of card games and board games with my family growing up, and my grandmother was something of a card shark disguised as a farmer.
I love that. Very, very cool. Maybe Marina, do you have a favorite, like a proudest moment after winning a game, or maybe a game you're particularly proud of creating?
I think that my favorite epic moment is when I introduce some, let's say as a curator, I introduce a game to a non-gamer, and I can do it with the right words, and they understand. So, for example, in an event I organized, there was this designer, and his parents were able for the first time to understand the process, just because we organized an exhibition around the process of the game design, and that's amazing, because when you can show something that's behind the process of the game design, I think that's my favorite part.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you. And then Gaetano, do you have an epic game experience you'd love to share?
Yes, I mean, I've been playing an online multiplayer game for 20 years now, World of
Yeah.
Warcraft. And last week I started playing with my 6 years old daughter, and that was amazing. I know it's too early, but come on, she's playing with me.
Well, I think you've touched on, you all in your own way have touched on the point I want to make, which is games touch our lives. They've touched our lives since we were small. They touch our lives today. Games are often around in the moments we're making memories. And I think the connection between memories and what culture means to us is so important. Whether that's about feeling proud, whether that's sharing a good laugh, whether that's bonding with your family or friends, a way to even make new friends, explore new cultures. I think gaming touches on life in so many different ways. I'm curious, I can't see the chat, but I'm imagining there's some other examples being shared there as well. So to start us off, I want you to think more about, you can also share your ideas in the chat here too, but I want you to carry with you the idea of what can games and cultural heritage learn from each other. This is ultimately a crux of our project as Epic We. And by games, we know we have a loose definition, whether games for you means something like, logging into the PlayStation and doing a multiplayer game together, whether it's a card game. For us, it's been really fun for Epic We to not have a super limiting understanding of what games are, nor what art is, although I've admittedly picked a bit of an icon to represent art at the moment in culture. So for our talk, I'm going to break this into two parts, thinking about games through cultural heritage, and I want to share with you a bit about how we organize cultural game jams for Epic We, and to give you more of a sense of like what the heck a cultural game jam is, how do you organize one, what have we learned through them, etc. And then end thinking more about games for cultural citizenship. Why do games, not only what can cultural heritage learn and use games for, but how can games be a tool to explore our own citizenship within the EU, maybe you're from outside the EU, and our own understanding of culture. So I mentioned my job with Epic We is I am in charge of our work package that organizes cultural game jams. And you might be asking, what's a cultural game jam? Well, let me tell you. In essence, we're bringing together 4 different kinds of partners, in this case, cultural heritage institutions, higher education, creative industries, and youth, young people, to create games together. A game jam itself, of course, is often kind of this rapid creating of games in a quick manner. What makes it cultural is we're using our cultural collections as a source of inspiration, and we're using games to explore societal challenges and European values. So it's been very exciting to see how working with young people and using games as a way for these young people to explore what do European values mean for them? What do societal challenges like sustainability, like mental health, how do they understand them? How can games be a way of creating dialogue, shedding a new light or perspective on an idea, maybe unearthing something we're not often talking about, or we feel might be ignored or should be better highlighted in our own cultural collections, in our own heritage. So that's a bit of the dry version, but what's a cultural game jam? I think I wanted to share with you a bit of what did our first game jam look like in Hilversum. I'm based in the Netherlands. Admittedly, don't sound Dutch. I'm American by birth, but living right now in the Netherlands. And on our first game jam, we came together in a rapid 2-day way to bring to life games. It was so exciting to work with, in this case, 16 to 24-year-olds. For that first game jam, it leaned a bit older. I think on average, it was more like 20 to 24. Our participants are always young people, the ones who are actually creating the games, although they're working together with us as Epic We, so those higher education, cultural heritage, creative industries partners. And they're often students. It's not a requirement to be a student, but we find that tends to be who's often attracted. But what's cool is they're often coming from very different fields. We're looking at young people studying everything from game design to business, having more of a computer science background, more of a cultural heritage background. And it's been very exciting to see how those different backgrounds come together, both through our recruitment, but also through our various hubs, kind of who we're working with. So for example, We have 3 hubs making game jams. We have one based in Portugal, in Óbidos, one based in Hilversum in the Netherlands, which we lovingly call Hillywood because it's the heart of media in the Netherlands. And our third is based in Aarhus. And our game jams are often held in partnership and with the cultural collections of these 3 hubs. What's been very cool is our cultural heritage partners are very different. And I think you'll see how that affects how we do cultural game jams. So I come from an institute that focuses on media collections. It means we collect things like music, news, videos. Our archives are very different than, say, the ones over in our house at the Aros Museum, which leans more into being a museum where you're thinking about more like art, paintings, sculptures, etc., which means people interact with them very differently. Their relationship with them are very different. Now you throw in Óbidos, and our cultural heritage partner is the city itself. It's a cultural heritage UNESCO city of world culture, and it's so interesting to work with them because their understanding of what does culture mean, it's the lived experience of people from the city of Óbidos. So these cultural game jams, we organize them maybe not in a way that sounds too different from a regular game jam, although you should keep in mind, we're also doing this for research. So we brought together teams in each hub, and we have our cultural heritage partners, higher education, creative industries working together to think about, okay, how can we explore our cultural institutions with young people? How can we run them in a way where we're recruiting young people to be both participants? How can we pull in interesting experts? How do we produce these game jams? How do we conduct research around them to better understand how young people are exploring these themes, exploring their own values, etc.? How do we facilitate activities in these game jams? How do we document them so that we can share our best practices with others in the future? And how do we communicate both internally and externally with what the heck is happening? I'm an event planner by trade, so I'm always very curious to see what does it mean to run something. So I thought I'd show you a couple examples. So in Hilversum, we experimented with 2 formats. Our first game jam, we went for really quick and dirty. We did in 48 hours a game jam where students arrived Saturday morning, did an overnight at our museum, and by Sunday afternoon, they had developed a game. So it really meant go, 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 go. They were up at all hours, including the staff who spent the night with them. So it was a very fun sleepover with pizza and everything, creating games. But we also experimented with, we were inspired by the other hubs, because what's been so fun with Epic We is we can learn from each other. And with our second one, we went for less of a sprint, more of a marathon, where we lengthened the game jam to last over a week. So instead, we worked in our second case, we wanted to work with a slightly younger group. So secondary student, high school students, more like 16 years old. And we came to their school. We did a field trip to the museum, but then every day for a few hours a day, they worked on their games. So from Monday until Friday when they'd completed a game. A little more relaxed. But what's interesting, and I can tell you more about, is actually the results ended up being quite comparable, whether you do it really fast or stretched over a longer period of time. So when we were organizing them, typically, we'd make people feel more familiar with design of games. What's super interesting too is we're not only recruiting people who know how to make games. We're often, at least what I found in our case, is cultural game jams tend to attract people who've maybe never made a game before, but they're really curious about how can games help me to better understand the field I'm studying in. Can maybe give me some tools to help better explore the other kind of work that I do, which is why we've often attracted a nice mix of both people who study game making, but also people who study, broadly speaking, in the creative and cultural fields. That's also where it's nice to then bring them into the institutions, explore what their cultural collections look like up close, whether in our case that means coming to a museum, or in the case of maybe a partner like Óbidos, exploring the city. We're often then doing rapid prototyping, ideation, gathering feedback from experts, documenting steps along the way until finally we play test and present what's come out of this game jam. We love to also make sure, students or participants aren't only trying out their own games, but trying out the games of others, getting feedback from people outside their own bubbles to try to see what kind of impact, what kind of dialogue is coming from the experience of not only thinking about the game, but actually doing the game. So at this point, with Epic We, you might be curious. Okay, you've made some games. Maybe how many? We've hosted 6 game jams so far. We're now at the end of our first iteration of doing game jams. We've then had 2 in Portugal in Obidos, 2 in Denmark in Aarhus, and 2 in the Netherlands in Hilversum. We call these our local game jams, and in the next few months or so, we're going to start debuting local game jams where we do more collaboration across these hubs as well. In total, it means we've engaged almost 200 young people to actually come together to play games. We're aiming for about 360 across all of our game jams. And we've made a little over 50 games so far during these interventions. Now, you notice some stars. I'm going to give you some lessons along the way we learned with how do we count young people and games made in this process. But all in all, we've had a great output. It's certainly from a recruitment perspective, I can give you some tips on how that's when to actually engage young people using these games, getting them interested in signing up. But in general, there's definitely been some clear intrinsic motivation to want to explore culture through game making. So these lessons learned. Cultural heritage has been really interesting to explore through game making, but it often works better when there's some intrinsic motivation there. It's been a struggle we've had through doing these trials of game jams, is trying to decide, do we go for guaranteed numbers where, say, we approach a school or a class and say, we want your class to sign up? Then we know we have a certain amount of people, but we don't know, they don't always know why they're there, or they might feel forced to be there. What's often fun in kind of typical game jams is people sign up because they want to be there. And so it's been interesting to see what that tension between, am I making games because I have to? Am I exploring these ideas because my teacher tells me to? Or am I exploring them because they mean something to me? So that's something we're also experimenting with, is how can we drive an intrinsic investigation of these ideas, even if you're maybe a little obligated to be there because of classes. Because in the end, if people want to host cultural game jams, it's not only going to work if the only way they work is just people show up because they really want to be there. We did find time of year really affected ability to recruit students. It's maybe a tip I'd give if you ever want to do these in the future. Young people, especially if they have school, it's good to know your school calendar. That definitely affected when and how we could host our own game jams. We also found that documenting the game jams and collecting paperwork really matters about age. So keep in mind too that depending on, for example, if people are 16 or under, we got our lawyer on the call. Bear in mind, there's extra protections for them. So don't forget to get all your paperwork in place. Also, young people aren't always the most interested in the idea of thorough documentation, which we as researchers creating these game jams always want. So it's a tip I would give as well, is if you're doing this for class, you're doing it for research, I really have strong methods in place for how you're making sure to collect all of that data and research along the way. And don't just assume the participants are going to do it for you. In fact, what they're there for is to make games. They're not, sometimes reflection can be useful, but they're not there to fill out surveys. You know what I mean? What was so interesting though was to see, we experimented with very different formats. We did, for example, in Obidos, students actually stayed in residency for a week creating games. In Hilversum, we experimented in Aarhus as well with really short, tight game jams versus long ones, but the actual quality of games was pretty consistent across all of this. And having students actually reflect on societal themes, regardless of length of game jam, that was still often quite deep. And in general, even if they were forced to be there, we still found pretty consistently positive feedback at the end that they really appreciated having the time to reflect on these themes and use games as a way to talk about maybe ideas they hadn't already thought of before or hadn't always had a space to think about them. We were really moved in particular in Aarhus as the topic of queerness often came up. And it was really exciting to see a space where you often have participants who felt like this was a space where they could finally talk about identity and talk about difference, but also inclusion and how those come together. And game making was a way to do that. And I think cultural game jams provided the safe and interesting space to explore that. Funnily enough, though, incorporating the cultural collections has been a bit of a challenge so far. We've definitely found that although games, we heard in earlier talks, can certainly be used to explore cultural values, can be set in interesting historical cultural settings and such, it didn't always come naturally to participants to say, I want to take this inspiration from a cultural collection and put it into that game idea. So it was interesting how to sort of stimulate that conversation. And what does inspiration mean? Does it mean I have to take a painting? Does it mean I have to use a specific media clip? Can I be inspired by aesthetics? Can I be inspired by how maybe you presented or talk about these ideas in your collection, or maybe don't talk about these ideas? So I think inspiration was a very fluid and flexible word for us. Finally, we found a market format worked really well. It's a tip I would love to give to everyone as a chance of, at the end, for young people to be able to see all of the games everyone had made together and try them out. And rather than maybe pitching one at a time, but setting up a room where you can see all of them at once, made them feel much more comfortable at the idea of sharing what they were doing, seeing what others were up to, and having experts come and approach them. I think making someone stand on the spot is not always the most inclusive way of getting people to share. It can be incredibly intimidating, especially if you're very young. So something I'd love to share. So games for cultural citizenship. The second half of this talk is we should think more about what does it mean to be a cultural citizen. So for me, the definition I love to use is that cultural citizenship refers to the everyday practices through which individuals use media, use culture, maybe popular culture, to negotiate their identity, their sense of belonging, and their participation in society. And so for us, using game jams, we really wanted to make sure that the themes at the heart of what we're doing relate back to belonging, identity, European values. So for us, we really wanted to explore more and give youth space to think about messy topics with no clear answers, things like sustainability, things like queerness, but also where do those intersect with cultural heritage? So some concrete examples: in our house, they looked at the idea of human nature. So they had a whole exhibition on philosophy, religion, nature, and, you know, having people draw inspiration from that. And where do European values fit into that? Sound and vision, because we're a media collection, we ask people to think more about social justice and democracy, and where do media and those important European values collide or come together. And in Óbidos, as the city of literature, this is one of my favorite ones, where again, the city itself was the theme explored, and thinking more about what does it mean to be a city of literature? How do I fit into there? What does it mean to get out of such an important thing? And sometimes games are profound. Oftentimes they can also just be a little silly and fun. That doesn't mean they don't make you think. A game that still sticks with me from that game jam example is, we had the privilege of going to Óbidos, and that is a city filled with cats. If you ever get a chance to go, you can pet a ton of cats and read a ton of books. And a lot of the young people had picked up on that. So they created a whole game where you are a cat exploring the city, and you have to write in order to do it and move around. And had people think more about digital literacy and writing, but also playing on the ideas of what makes that particular city, that particular piece of heritage special. To conclude, how else are we enabling youth to explore cultural citizenship? It's not just game making. Games, of course, as a vehicle, are our bread and butter. Games are a chance to think about, you know, create conversation on these important themes, but we've also asked youth to play a more advisory role. We are ultimately trying to be a quadruple helix, bring 4 partners together, not just 3 partners and some test subjects. So that means in our next set of games, we're really asking young people to think more with us around, what themes do you care about? How can we design these game jams to matter more, to feel interesting to young people like you? How can you be an equal partner in judging what kind of games are interesting, valuable, what could make them stronger, etc.? Assisting with recruitment, maybe we have blind spots that they notice we can try to fill in.
We have a question to clarify, Susanna. Global,
yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Oh, global. Ah, global. Such a buzzword. Global and local together. So by global, we mean, for example, let's take a word like sustainability. That is a global theme. It touches every part of our planet, but locally, we can all reflect and do something with that in different ways. So ultimately, with our game jams, we want to try to pick themes that can act as umbrellas, themes that are overarching, maybe speculative and imaginative in nature, and touch on these European values. So similarly, European values are very global too, right? Equality, freedom, democracy, etc. But the way in which they could manifest could look very different locally. The way in which they could intersect with the cultural collection can and will look very different for each game jam. So global, local, brought together.
Excellent. Thank you.
No, thanks for asking. And yeah, and ultimately we're excited that an upcoming phase of this project is to think about further developing the games of Epic We, and how can young people help us think more about which games should go into development, how should we develop them, etc. And finally, thinking about policy recommendations. It would be foolish to not include youth on these very youth-oriented policies we're hoping to think more about around games. So when it comes to being a cultural citizen, we're really hoping that for youth who want to be more involved with Epic We beyond game making itself, we can try to create those outlets for meaningful involvement. And on that note, I'm done.
Great.
So,
we will have questions at the end, but great presentation, Susanna. I have also lots of thoughts on, for example, the youth that participated. Were they youth with certain resources that had, are we getting also those that are maybe different? But let's take that at the end. So you guys participating, please write your questions in the chat and we will catch up on those. And thank you to Susanna Montgomery, not only for an excellent presentation, but also for holding the time exactly. All of you are really good. Thanks a lot. Next up is Marina Rossi, a freelance producer, a digital curator, and ethical designer, co-founder and event director at Game Happens, which is currently on hold. I see a nonprofit organization based in Genova, Italy, dedicated to exploring the social and cultural impact of games. You've been part of the game industry since 2009, working as a game designer, producer, and communications strategist. And you are advocating for diversity, inclusivity, and accessibility in all fields. You collaborate with Meet Digital Culture Center, a partner in the Epic We project. That's very true. So Marina Rossi, now the suit is yours.
Thank you, Rasmus. Okay. So hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you all. So, okay. Rasmus had already presented me perfectly. Just one more thing. Meet Digital Culture Center based in Milan, Italy, is one of the partners of the Epic We project and is the lead hub for the Work Package 5. So the one that is dedicated to create all the resources and all the communicational side at the end of the project. So we are starting to collecting all the data, and then we're working on putting all the data at service of everyone. So I wanted to give you a bit of a story, a bit of the process, the collection process that we have started this year, just to go to the heart of the presentation, that is the games that have been the prototypes, the game prototypes that have been developed during the game jams that Susanna had already presented. So we started with which kind of data do we want to collect? Of course, general info about the game prototypes, and then some additional info. So we can, just from the beginning, we decided to have some core data and then some more additional info, some more information about the process and how the games were made as a collection of data. This because we have from the start envisioned that the teams wouldn't have much time to dedicate to the collection of data to give us all the information, but we wanted to give the opportunity to expand all the information that they could get. So how to collect them? We started to to brainstorm a bit, but we wanted something easy to use, something easy to update, and maybe something that could be integrated in the creative process. So during the game jam, something that they could use as a platform to integrate their process. So this one are the main data that we decided to collect. And at the end, we decided to use itch.io as the platform, the main platform, to collect all the games or the prototypes and all the data. Why? Because it's an open marketplace, very well known in the game industry, especially in the independent game industry, at any level, from the solo developers to established studios. So it would be a good point of view for new game makers. And you can create a collection of the game developed during the game jam. So it would be very easy to have all the games in one place. This one is the homepage in Itch. Another point very useful for Itch is that you can create easily a game jam on a digital game jam on Itch. Here you can see a small part of the calendar of right now, all the game jams that are hosted on Itch. There are tons of game jams at the same time, and you can browse all the experimented, all the prototypes. So it's super inspiring. So you can have tools for the organizer that you can adapt to your own game jam. So for example, if you want a jury, you can add that, but you can decide to do not have any juries, or also you can have some kind of communities. So anyone can leave a message if you want, anyone can discuss on the games. So it's very flexible. So the first pros were that, so the customization of the game page, each team could customize the game page, so they could not only give us this basic info that we needed to collect, but they could also be very creative with design of the page, so they could have a sort of a first impression for anyone they could see. So it was very funny to see how the different teams customize their pages. So, and also we included a development logs, so a journal to follow the creative process. And this one was a bit harder for the team to include, to follow, because they were asked to also reflect in a written way, and in a maybe too much work for the time that they had. But there was some teams that they had amazing development logs, and you can see how the process of the creative process worked for them, and it was very interesting. So opportunities, as I said, easy to use, also useful for future game makers. There are already some participants that have already tried to create some other prototypes on each, so it's super interesting. and also it's easy to follow up and ask to update the game page, because as I said, in the game jam time, in that days, not everyone can fill up everything, but you can also ask, but of course it's not mandatory. You can also ask to include, to add more info in the following days, for example. So it's also if a team is well, if a team wants to expand, for example, the journal, they can do it in the following days. So it's very easy. The challenge is the time, as I said, and so the same amount of data is quite virtually impossible to have, because there will always be a team that is more also is more can express their creative process easier, and so they have more information, while other teams are it would be more difficult for them. And also board games were often less documented, because even if you don't have the time to write all the info that we're asking you, but you can build a digital game. You can build a game prototype, and we as a game collection team will analyze the game, so we will have all the information in an indirect way. So if we need, for example, if we need the instruction and the controls, but we didn't have the time to write how to control your game, I will play your game, and I can easily write this information. While for the board games, if I don't have the board game, I cannot tell how the board game is working. So maybe this one in the second iteration that will begin at the beginning of the next year, a short a standard checklist for the board games will be included. And then a brief games overview. So this one, as said by Susanna, are the first, I would say, the first data about the games. So here you can see some kind of data for each game jam, how many prototypes have been developed. For example, which platform is more chosen. The PC games are the vast majority, and Unity as a game engine is the first choice for most of them. We talked about the values here, especially we are referring to the European cultural values, and sometimes a game can touch more of one values, most of the times, I would say. And on the other hand, there are some kind of themes, for example, environmental themes that can be included in some different in different values, European values, depending on the kind of focus they have. So most of the times are the rule of law, because of environmentally rule of law, but it depends. So I would say it's just a first classification. just to give you some example. And also other themes. So talking about themes, we have seen many games on the climate crisis, biodiversity, visual arts, literature, as said by Susanna, social justice and mental health. And now,
Sorry, Marina, the last themes you mentioned, they were lower ranked than the other ones, I suppose. They were also part of the themes.
Sorry? Yeah.
The previous slide had them, ranked.
Yeah.
But it's a continuation of.
No, it's not a continuation. I would say this one is the main European cultural values. So this one is the main classification as cultural values, while these are the main themes that emerged. I didn't put any number on it because
Okay, so themes related to the values. Okay.
Exactly. There are themes related to the cultural values. So
I get it.
okay, thank you. And then the game prototypes, I've selected a few game prototypes. Of course, we have almost 50 games, so I'm here just to talk about some games. For example, Rumination. It's a game that draws inspiration from a Danish painter, Wilhelm Hammershøi. And the aesthetic of the painter is what inspired this theme. These ones are two of the paintings of the Wilhelm Hammershøi, and this one are two screenshots from the game, so you can see how can relate visually and the mood and the lights to the game. The title is a combination of the words room and rumination. So psychological term that means the act of thinking carefully for a very long period about something. And you have a game loop where you enter a room. So this one is not only inspired visually, but also as a theme has been fully explored by the team. Then we have Create Your Legacy. You play as the war artist, and so you dodge bullets and enemies while painting art. This one is really interesting because you have with your keyboard, you can have your painting. You can paint, but you have to switch from what you see, so the battle and your drawing and your painting, and at the end what you have done will be presented, will be exhibited in a museum. So it creates your legacy. Heart Parable is a game inspired by a painting of William Quinn and puts together an interesting and reliable narrator story. So someone is talking to you and invites you to interact with the painting, and you have a very, very different and very modern and actual art style, and you interact with the painting, with the original painting. Here you can see a bit of how it's working. So you click on the barn, and the barn is put on the painting, and so it goes. Goose on the Loose. Here's a game where you fly as a goose, and is inspired by Johannes Larsson paintings, and this one is one of his paintings. So you can easily see how the mood and how the art style is inspired by it. And in the end, just like in Create Your Legacy, you can see your painting that in this case is how you land after a short period of time on the beach. And you see your painting in a museum. Talking about birds, Bees Flamingo is a game that involves the population, the flamingo population in the Hobbydusch Lagoon. And so it's very interesting from the point of view of environmental awareness. Spirit of the Lake, you are in Spirit of the Lake, you are a fox that is possessed by the spirit of the lake, and you roam around this lagoon, the Hobbydusch Lagoon, and check if the animals are in their habitat. So you have this interface while you have the animals and how they live and the habitats and the information about where they should live and when and how they live. If it's correct, you give them a green paw, and so yes, you can live here because it's your natural environment. In criminal fauna identification, we have birds that are the suspects. So you have a more crime twisted narrative, but it's also really interesting and fun. We have told about the cats. The cats here in the catastrophic climate, we have a board game about an environmental mission to control a team of cats combating ocean plastic pollution. While in Puss in Books, as Susanna has already said, you get the cat through a journey you need to write. For example, here you need to write stop and the platform will stop and you can jump on the platform. So it's instantly narrative and inspired by literature. Here, just a short video to let you understand better how it works. So it's super cute. Also words because as said, Hobbydusch is also a city of literature, so you have another intensely based on words game. So you collect letters, you collect power up, and you interact with the characters. In Grind the Words, players are asked to grind different kind of objects. So you start with the food, but at one time a puppy shows up. So it's very disturbing, and it's very disturbing because by design, of course, the player has the freedom to refuse, making them reflect on mindless gaming behavior. So the point is, why are you doing this? So a self-aware game that kind of let you ask yourself, okay, how far will I go in a game to satisfy what the game is asking me? And this game is inspired by one works video art, Grinding Onions, where two women are grinding onions and they're crying. So suffering as a concept. And a kind of similar example is the Kill the Blue Guys, where you are the only red guy and you're asked to kill all the blue guys. And it's very shoot 'em up, basic game, but the point is, why are you doing this? And there is an underlying message that critiques racial prejudice, of course. Also games about human dignity and freedom, aphasia. You have a game loop where you just wake up, eat some food and go to work, but each time all the environment is weirder and weirder. So that reflects mental health, decaying mental health, I would say. And so players are encouraged to think deeply about their own lives and choice. And last, Ninci, goes back to school, a board game about the importance of mental health. And this board games, the interesting part is that there are two friends that want to help the protagonist, Nancia, but if the protagonist doesn't want your help, it's very difficult to move along. So it's a very interesting process. So some participant feedbacks. We have positive feedbacks from many participants that love the opportunity to work together, to play around with game making and culture creation, to work with cultural heritage through philosophy and freedom, for example, and based on a calming painting. This one is from Goose on the Loose, sorry. And it's very interesting, as calm would be really interesting values for the teams. And the culture and the atmosphere were truly inspiring. Here we are talking about the Óbidos experience, as said, or the whole city of Óbidos has been an inspiration for the teams. And the empowerment that the teams felt during this experience. And just one last thing, we're working on the resource website, so we're collecting all the games in a more curated and unified way. But you have all the links in the chat, of course, to play more games, play the games that I presented, play the games that I haven't presented. If you want to also leave some example of some comments, some positive comments or on the games, I would absolutely love it.
Thank you very much, Marina. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for those of you who think now you can just head out, we would like for you to definitely leave, I'm trying to multitask here, a comment or your key takeaways in the Menti. That would be great. We were 41 people at one point, now we're down to 27. So I hope you make sure that you leave us your comments so we know how it was. We have some questions coming in, and the first one is for Mary. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the question, so maybe you want to start out, Mary, with the question from Paul Watson. Thank you.
Yeah, I did see that. Thanks, Paul, and thank you, everyone. These are really interesting presentations. Wondering what has been some of the core values or attitudes you might have seen been influenced in games, and whether there has been any evidence that a change in these have held over time. It's kind of a big picture question.
It is.
But yeah, it's a really big one. there are So for example, I did a research study where we were doing sexual assault prevention games for incoming college students, because as you know, you may have heard that the United States has a problem with rape cultures in university campuses. And so we were doing a bystander intervention training, and we did do a longitudinal study we did 2 game interventions that worked together with this orientation, and we did find that the tendency towards thinking more like a bystander held through time, like a month or 2 later. So, but longitudinal studies are notoriously difficult to run because they're expensive and they take a lot of persistence and time and etc. So we don't have a lot of evidence. I'm just be honest. There is not a lot of kind of statistical or quantitative evidence about games' impact. It's just an underfunded area of study. And in fact, sometimes game designers will come out and try to do something that's really pro-social. For example, raising awareness about homeless populations. That can actually backfire, and players may think that people are homeless because it is their own responsibility and kind of blame the victim. So there are a lot of unintended consequences when you're designing and taking responsibility for what you're designing, right? So I guess I would just say that games do influence values, but so does everything else that we're exposed to, right? And you can't, I have been, over my research labs 20 years, I have been shocked to see a small game intervention really have an impact, actually, that you can actually lower measures of racism by playing a game. And you can do these things in big numbers. So I would say that the potential is there, but we're still at the baby steps of how to actually understand what games are doing, and whether even everyone thinks that the game format itself is automatically an empathy machine, and I would say that it's not. We can't assume these kinds of things. Games also present choices, so that has a kind of impact on the topics and the subjects. And again, the mechanics of games, what we're doing, sometimes communicates in a completely different manner than what the topic or the subject is. So all of those things come together. They're very complex systems, and I guess it's not really an answer, but it's a comment.
So it's actually, if we look at the creative industries companies that are involved in EPIC-WE and also in game jams in general, it's difficult to give any advice whether they should meet people where they are in their values and then try to move them rather than what some of I know that we have a Magnus Göransson from Okatima here, a game developer. So would it be best advised to say, well, try and design your games with some values that might be different to people, and that will draw them to that, or that can't simply be said. Really, we don't know enough about how we can move people through the design, through the values that create the design of a game. I don't know if my question is understandable, Mary.
Not too much.
Is it better to create games that kind of confirm their values, or is it better to create games that get people thinking about their values?
I think both are great. I think what we tend to see, though, is that we don't talk about the values that are in games. We just don't. We just kind of skip over that. And having people reflect is great. Presenting values and seeing if people pick them up and if they like them. I mean, games have to be free spaces, right? So no one wants to be told what to think when they're playing games, but there certainly might be characters who have particular points of view and things like that. The one problem is and this is a constant in design, and that's why a lot of designers are going for co-creation with their audiences, is that, of course, you don't want to be the godlike designer telling everyone what to think, right? Exactly. But you also don't want to be just receiving unreflective cultural morass and just reproducing it. So you have to sit in the middle somehow and forge your way about the values. And if you put priorities on values, it's really interesting. But I'll just say one really quick thing in that, you know, I'm in the United States right now, and the value of freedom, for example, is being interpreted in very, very, very different ways by very, very, very different groups. I would say that's probably true for y'all.
Yes.
And so we're in a moment where these conversations can't get more important because they are using these big picture ideas and redefining what they mean, right? And so for different groups to have privilege over other groups, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that we, as a responsible community, have to own parts of this conversation and follow up and really try. I mean, games have a lot of power, and a lot of us have been doing this for a long time, and we've seen the power. It hasn't reached scale, and often the power of influence in games just gets people to buy more games. Like that, it's used for commercial purposes and not necessarily used to build strong social worlds. So
thank you, Mary.
that's our theme.
Yeah. I see. Susanna, do you have a comment or a question?
A comment. I can also touch on. I saw that. I also have a question in Paul as well, actually, but I think I can blend them together, because to be honest, what Mary's talking about really speaks to me. So one, to be pragmatic, you're right, it's an underfunded area, but let me tell you, Epic We is studying the power of games and their impact. So I do want to say that's something I'm excited about. So the question around, you know, are these game jams just a space where we happen to see dialogue and like, you know, people coming together around these themes happening, or, you know, opinions bubbling up? We're also doing so much documentation, both we try as much as possible for the folks participating in the game jam to not feel too much like test subjects. In fact, we got that feedback from the first version where they sort of felt like all eyes were on them all the time. So we've dialed it back a bit, but through things like we're doing vox popping, for example, where throughout the game jam, the participants can let us know their thoughts on different phases of their own development. We're, of course, documenting the games themselves, as Marina showed us very thoroughly through their own written explanations of the games. We're also, for example, in Hilversum, doing recorded walkthroughs of the games. So it gives us a lot of, not only just from the pragmatic side of how do you make the games, but better understanding the thought process of why did they make it this way? And also the really interesting dialogue that happens when someone tries your game, how does that make them feel? I see, for example, someone on the call right now who's one of the experts we invited on our jury, and that was one of the richest spaces we also saw, where folks who are experts in game development, in the cultural industries, things like that, could also like playfully provoke the game jammers to also think about, how can I go a bit deeper in what I'm developing? What are maybe some implications I wasn't thinking about? Often young people, they maybe don't have a huge foot in the door yet in the industry, in a way that industry experts can often also shine a light on, like, what could be some repercussions of this game? What could be some incredible impacts of these games? So we're trying as best we can as researchers to document all this and hopefully share. And to a second point, not related to Epic We, but related to my own professional life, I've been on tour for the last 6 months with a gamified exhibition called Fabricated, around unraveling fact from fiction in your digital world. We went on tour around the EU ahead of their elections, UK ahead of their elections, and most recently the US ahead of their elections, to document digital literacy and how do folks across the political spectrum understand these ideas. And we're trying to use games and playful interventions to have people think about them. So I totally hear you. There's not a lot of this action research out there about it. And it's something we're also really trying to uncover, is how can games, you know, are they confirming people's beliefs? Are there ways we can push people to think outside of their own belief system by playing around and adopting different ideas? Even just how much your own baggage comes into whether or not you like a game, whether or not you choose to interact. We weren't expecting that, really. And I'm really interested and excited to write more from both our quantitative and qualitative data we've been gathering. So little bits of research are coming on these topics, maybe some social good too.
Great. There was a comment, not a question, to Gaetano, and Gaetano answered. Thank you, Paul. I don't know if you want to say anything more, Gaetano, because it wasn't really a question.
There is a lot to say on that comment. I mean, sometimes the comments are the worst question. Yes, it is true that conflict resolution in community games is easier to achieve. And if you think about it, actually solving societal cultural issue in a video game is easy because you patch it, you test it, and if it doesn't work, you patch it again. They're all things that we cannot do it outside of a video games. I mean, you cannot have law reforms, and after a month you realize it wasn't a good idea, and you change it. But also because the consequences are seen as less impactful. So it's true that we don't fully understand, but there is also a clear understanding from the methodological point of view that video games environment are test environment. I mean, we don't fully understand how we can extrapolate the lesson learned and translate it outside of video games, but there are also places that you can observe, you can control. You cannot change the rule of physics outside of the video game, but you cannot in video games. For instance, recently, I mean, World of Warcraft is in the 20th anniversary, so it's on the news a lot. In the US, they were also opted on the New York Times, thinking about how they impacted culture. And there's also a really beautiful documentary on Netflix at the moment on a player with disabilities. Now, what they didn't say in the documentary is that players try to kill each other during the funeral, and when they create the mausoleum to remember him, people were attacking each other. What Blizzard could do immediately is to make that zone a non-player versus player zone and block all the wrongdoing with a patch. It's much more difficult to do it outside of video games. I'm not suggesting we should do it outside of video games, but it's interesting to see how whenever you change the rule in the video games, people react, community react. And I'm really curious. I really hope that Epic Wheel will give us some answer, if not all the answer. Or now we can actually extrapolate this way of understanding what is fair. I mean, Paul used fair. That is like a really nice concept, but it's not really objective what is fair. Depends who you ask. And in video games, we can monitor it. We can quantifiable. I think it was part of Mary's presentation at the beginning. How can we make it quantifiable? What is it a success? How can we measure that? That's also a big question that I don't have the answer to.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Gaetano. We are reaching the end of this almost 2-hour session here. Any last questions from anyone? We do have another session here. Yeah, Billy is bringing up. Maybe I should advertise next Monday, the 2nd of December at 2 o'clock Central European time. We're no longer summertime, regular time, winter time. We will be talking about cultural hubs and living labs, and I encourage you to join us there. And you can see the recordings and the materials from last session and this session in our media area on My Creative Networks under the Games for Culture. I think we should wrap it up here unless there are any last minute questions. I don't think so. So thank you so much to Mary Flanagan, to Gaetano Dimita, to Susanna Montgomery, and to Marina Rossi. Thank you, everyone, for speaking and also for participating. Please fill out the Mentimeter link with your comments so we know how we can make it better every time we do this. So thanks.
Thank you, everyone.